in August of 2007, Perrin Beatty was named President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And as we know, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is the largest and most representative business organization in Canada. Through its broad network of local chambers of commerce and boards of trade, it represents more than 170,000 members of all sizes, from all sectors of the economy and from all regions of the country, and of course including the Ajax Pickering Board of Trade. Perrin?
Madam President, members of the board, elected representatives, ladies and gentlemen. Don, thank you, first of all, very much for the very kind introduction. You're absolutely right. Periodically, I'm called upon to speak to convocations at community colleges or elsewhere. And when people go through my checkered career, you finally see this look coming onto the students' faces where they realize that without having the sort of useful skills you can develop at a community college, you can't hold a job for very long. Let me just, in starting out, first of all, say what a tremendous pleasure it is to be here. Let me put on, if I may, my other hat that I wear when I'm in the region. And that's the funny-looking one that Ron Bordessa persuaded me to take on as Chancellor of U of IT. Say simply, it's particularly appropriate with you, Donna, taking over the responsibility here, with Don and Ron, who's become a very good friend of mine over the course of the last couple of years, both here, to say how fortunate we are as Canadians and also as residents of this region to have two institutions like Durham College and U of IT that contribute so much both to the community, the province, and to the country. As I go across the country talking to business people, the theme that increasingly is coming back is that the key to our success in global competitiveness is the quality of skills and innovation that we develop in this country. And these two institutions are doing an incredible job in preparing a whole new generation of young Canadians to take on positions of leadership in business, and also encouraging innovation and the transfer of knowledge into the private sector, where it can be used to drive economic growth. So I'm delighted, Donna, to congratulate you and welcome you. I'm delighted that it ties these two institutions just that much more closely to the business community in this region and in Canada. You're going to do an outstanding job, and we're delighted to be able to work with you. It is a great pleasure to be able to be here. We have UOIT now for a couple of Christmases. We have had our Christmas party here at the golf club, so it's a bit of a homecoming. But I was reminded when I looked out tonight of 2 years ago, when I was asked to go and speak at a luncheon, which was the annual luncheon of the Brockville Chamber of Commerce. It was in April. I drove down from Ottawa. It was one of those incredibly beautiful spring days, and you're simply glad to be alive. It was green, lovely. The golf club was where it was held, just outside of town. And it couldn't have been more spectacular than it was that day, lovely warm day. And there was a large crowd from the local chamber where I was enormously impressed by how many people had come out. And in thanking them, I said to them, you know, I'm simply stunned that on a day like today, in a setting like this, in a golf club like this, that was so absolutely beautiful, that you would be inside listening to me instead of being outside playing golf. At which point somebody in the back of the room said, "We didn't have any choice, the course isn't open yet." I'm grateful that's the case here tonight as well. So none of you have any excuse for saying, I just have to slip out for 9 holes. What I want to do, I have to, and I apologize, I'll have to slip out early because I'm flying back to Disneyland in Rito. I have to get back out to the airport to catch the plane. The good news for you is it means that my speech will be shorter than it might otherwise be. And there's a good chance of getting back before the national news this evening if we play our cards right. But what I want to do is really just to do 2 or 3 things. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about the chamber movement in Canada and why it's important. Secondly, I want to talk to you about the Canadian economy, where we are today, and about some of the challenges that we see. And I want to take a minute as well to talk about what we in the Canadian Chamber are hoping that your neighbor, Mr. Flaherty, is going to be having in his budget when it comes down in March. I might add, I was Jason, I was very impressed to hear that you actually ran a surplus this year. You realize that put you more than $50 billion ahead of the government of Canada. And you see Mr. Flaherty's going to be asking to float along this time from you. Let me start with the chamber itself. Take a look around you at the people seated here. What you see is the men and women who build the community. They're the people who create the jobs, who pay the taxes, who get engaged with government, who are the volunteers who are involved, whether it's in the Chamber of Commerce or in service clubs, minor sports, in home and school, or 1,000 other different organizations in the community. They're the people who believe that they have an obligation that goes beyond simply going in, doing their thing for the day, and going back home. They're the builders, the dreamers, the creators, the people who are the contributors to their community. And you're part of a movement here of what is now, we've added this past year 80 new chambers of commerce across Canada to this network, to bring it to 420 chambers of commerce and boards of trade right across the country, representing 192,000 businesses in Canada. Every sector, every size, every region of the country. And it truly is Main Street Canada. The strength of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is to be found right here in this room. It comes from the fact that this is an organization which is a grassroots organization, which represents the broad swath of the Canadian business community. Large and small businesses alike, the vast majority of them, small and medium-sized businesses, but truly Main Street Canada. And as part of that movement, what you're doing by contributing your time and your efforts here in Ajax Pickering is to drive our roots deeper into the soil and to help us do a better job in representing the needs of the Canadian business community. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce and its network is a non-partisan organization. We work with political parties of all stripes. We support ideas which are good for economic growth in Canada. We oppose ideas that are bad for economic growth. But our goal is to seek prosperity for Canadians and to ensure that our children have the sort of opportunity that we've been privileged in our generation to enjoy. And that's what free enterprise is all about. It's what the chamber movement is all about in Canada. It's why it's important. It's significant as well, as the elected representatives here will tell you, because I can tell you from the time of the 21 years that I spent in Ottawa, that there are many organizations in Ottawa that present thoughtful briefs. They'll come in to see you. They've done a great deal of work on the brief. You listen to them politely, and you move on to the next appointment. It's very different if you're back home in the constituency in the weekend, and you're hearing from members of your own business community saying, we believe it's important that this be done because it's good here at home as well as across Canada. And that's where our strength comes from our membership, from coast to coast to coast, from people like you. And it's an extraordinary contribution that you make by the time that you volunteer. So the success, every success that we have at the national level is your success. We couldn't do it without you. And we would not have the impact that we have without your having a healthy, strong, growing 610 member organization right here in Ajax Pickering. It's something that strengthens all of us, and I thank you for your engagement. Well, why is that important? If our focus is the Canadian economy, what is good for Canadians from coast to coast, in terms of trying to create opportunity and prosperity for Canadian families, what do we see in terms when we look at the Canadian economy today? What are our expectations for this year? If you go onto our website, you can find the economic forecast, which we produced and released at the end of December for this coming year. We've also looked back at Canada's economic performance over the course of the last couple of years as well, and you'll find those documents on our website as well. But what's the bottom line in all this? First, relative to other Western industrialized countries, we've done well. We went into the recession later than most. It was shallower in Canada than it was in most of the other Western industrialized countries. And we came out of it faster than in most. We project that this year we'll likely see about 2.4% economic growth. Positive growth, moving in the right direction, but fragile and slow compared to where we were prior to the recession. So moving along, but we're not there as yet. We're still not fully out of the woods, and we're not back to the level of growth that we saw before. The other thing that we have to be very conscious of is that we keep on benchmarking ourselves, and I'm guilty of it in the same way as most of the rest of us are as well. We benchmark ourselves against the rest of the Western industrialized world. And the point that we miss when we talk about the global economic recession is that there was not a global economic recession. It was a recession among the Western democracies. If you look at countries like China and so much of the other countries in the developing world, or the re-emerging world, in the case of China, they continued to see growth at a pace that was simply breathtaking. If China's growth rate slips back from 9% to 8%, that's still a target that we would aim for in our wildest dreams. If we were facing fierce competition prior to the recession, where increasingly we're finding as a result of modern communications and the improvements in technology that's being made, that we have to benchmark ourselves against the best in the world, that our competitor, our supplier, our customer, our partner can either be down the street or on the other side of the world, but just a mouse click away. If that was the competition we were facing then, that competition has grown that much more over the course of the recession. They've continued to evolve. They've continued to revolutionize both their own economies and the global economy. We've seen a shift where historically it's been a case that the developing countries supply raw materials to the developed countries, the industrialized countries, who then turn around, create value to it, sell it back to the rest of the world, where today increasingly we're the suppliers of the raw materials to what was the developing world, who add value to it and sell it back to us. This is a dramatically changed global economy, and there is no turning back from that. It means then that for business people right here in this community and across Canada, the competition, which was fierce before the recession, is even more fierce today and will be more so tomorrow. And the challenge for us is to do precisely what President Obama was talking about when he gave the State of the Union address on Tuesday night, where he talked to the United States about the importance of committing itself to technology and to innovation and to entrepreneurship, to being able to take on the world and win, to have the best educated, best skilled workforce anywhere in the world, to have the most innovative economy, to be entrepreneurs. The Prime Minister this week designated 2011 as the year of the entrepreneur in Canada. I hope we don't feel the job is done at the end of the year. Every year needs to be the year of the entrepreneur in Canada. We need to celebrate entrepreneurship, we need to support it, we need to teach it, and we need to ensure that there's a climate here that is good and that encourages it. So that's the challenge for us, that we see global markets today that are intensely competitive and becoming more so every day. And we in Canada need to be able to benchmark ourselves not against the best in our region, or the best in our province, the best in our country, but against the best in the world in everything we do. This means as well that what is critical for us, if we want to look at jobs for young Canadians, is that we have the investment in this country that we need to be able to expand our businesses and to create new opportunities and to furnish the goods and the services that are wanted not just in Canada, but around the world. We need a climate that encourages investment in this country. As a result, then, the Canadian Chamber is working on a whole range of areas, some of it dealing with intellectual property and recognizing the importance and the value that there is in intellectual property in today's world. Some of it looking at fixing the Canada-US border, which particularly for the automotive sector is so important. Some of it looking at the regulatory burden that business faces today, to say that if we can take off some of that burden, if we can break down the barriers within Canada that partition our national economy, that we'll be much better ahead. We're looking at the issue of skills and how we can ensure that this is a highly skilled nation, the most competitive workforce anywhere in the world. We're looking at the demographic challenges that we face, We're looking at how we balance issues related to the environment and energy to ensure affordable energy, but in a way that's responsible and respects the environment as well. And we're looking at the issue of competitiveness and how we can ensure that Canadian businesses are able to measure up. Today, increasingly, when I go out to speak to businesses that are international corporations, where the Canadian company is here, and where each year the president of the Canadian company has to go to head office and justify the portion of the budget that goes into Canada. Why should we put those new jobs into Canada? Why should we expand our Canadian operation? Why should we move that research and development to Canada? What they're saying to me is that increasingly is a tremendous challenge for them to attract that investment into this country. There was a time when the Canadian dollar was trading 65, 70 cents relative to the US dollar. We had a competitive advantage in terms of the value of the dollar. Today we're trading at par or above. That's gone. And we can't count on a cheap, weak dollar as a means of making ourselves competitive. Wage rates in Canada are high, and it means that we don't have a great advantage in terms of cheap wage rates, particularly when we're looking at the emerging countries. Nor do we want young Canadians graduating from Durham College or from UOIT to be competing with somebody from Western China on the basis of who will accept the lowest pay. We want the high-end, value-added, knowledge-based jobs that are sustainable for this country and that create prosperity and a decent future. That's the area in which we have to compete. And we need to have the investment to be able to do it. What are we looking for from Mr. Flaherty when he brings down this budget? First, we recognize that Canada has done well, as I mentioned earlier, relative to our primary trading partners. But the time has come now where we need to make the transition away from a government-led recovery to one that is led by the private sector. There's no doubt that the stimulus programs we were talking about earlier were critical in stopping the Canadian economy from sliding even worse into recession than it had from 2008 on. It was very important for us to do that. But this is not the key to sustainable growth for the future. We have to move to private sector-driven growth as opposed to growth that comes from tax dollars being spent on new projects. How do we do that? We do it by attracting investment. Investors both from Canada and encouraging Canadian business people to expand and to become entrepreneurs and to take on new challenges and new risks. And we do it by encouraging capital to be invested in Canada from abroad, by having an investment climate that makes us competitive. And this is absolutely critical to us if we're going to be successful. When President Obama spoke on Tuesday night, he talked about launching a major tax reform in the whole area of corporate taxes, of doing away with areas where he felt the code was discriminatory, or gave unfair advantage to one sector over another, or one company over another, but to knock loose money, to bring down the rate of corporate taxes in the United States so they could attract the investment that the United States is looking for to generate new jobs. If you look at today's USA Today, you'll see an article on it saying that the chances for this president to be able to achieve this are the highest there's been in recent years. That's sort of a substantive tax reform, which is a tough thing to do. And they said that one of the reasons why it was essential for him to do that was Japan is intending this spring to lower its corporate tax rate to attract investment to Japan and away from the United States, away from other countries. But they're not alone. When I was at the G20 in Seoul in November, Prime Minister Cameron of Great Britain, a country with enormous financial difficulty right now, where they're being forced to slash public sector employment, spoke to all of us in a powerful speech. He committed himself to slashing corporate taxes in Great Britain. Why? Why was he saying this to the global business community? Because they want investors to move their investment from Canada, from other countries, to Great Britain. And indeed, the Prime Minister of Australia said the same thing. So the message that we give to your neighbour, Mr. Flaherty, is it's important to stay the course. Successive Liberal and Conservative governments over the course of the last several years, starting with Mr. Martin, have been bringing down our tax rates. They've done so in a coordinated way with provincial governments to try to make it so that Canada and Ontario and the other provinces would have a competitive tax climate that would attract investors to this country. And it's important that we stay the course. Other countries aren't giving up. Other countries today are looking at improving their position and making themselves more competitive relative to us. And it's important that we move ahead. So we encourage Mr. Flaherty to stay on track with that and to keep the commitment that was made in 2 successive federal budgets that passed Parliament. And secondly, we asked the Minister of Finance to set out a program to balance the federal budget within a reasonable period of time. We have to encourage economic growth in the country, to swell the tax revenues, but we also have to have constraint on public spending as well. In exactly the same way as your businesses or your institutions have been affected with the recession and have to live within their means, so too must the federal government. And we need a plan that within 5 years will bring us back into balance. Again, I give the credit to Mr. Martin during his time as Minister of Finance, when the government of Canada started to pay down the national debt. The extraordinary achievement, one of the things that put us in a good footing as we went into the recession relative to other Western industrialized countries, is that for 10 years, successive Liberal and Conservative governments had been paying down the national debt at the very same time as other Western industrialized countries had been running theirs up with successive deficits. Most of our provinces were in balance at the time that the recession struck. And that gave us a flexibility and a strength that enabled us to respond more effectively during the recession. We need to get ourselves back on that footing again, and it's possible for us to do. And certainly if you look at the challenge for us, compared to the challenge that Prime Minister Cameron faces in Great Britain, or the unbelievable challenge that President Obama faces in the United States, this is eminently doable in Canada if we're prepared to show leadership. Well, there are many issues. We don't have time to touch on them all tonight, but we hope that the Minister of Finance, when he brings down the budget, and I'll meet with the Prime Minister on Monday to give him the same message as well. We hope that they recognize that the business community today is the key to economic health in this country, that we need to create the climate that will restore business confidence so that individual business people in this room, people like you across Canada, will sit down and will have the confidence that the economy will be better next year than it is this year. And that will help to unlock the investment that's absolutely critical for us to move to the private sector growth that will drive the economy again, and create opportunity again. These are big challenges. But they're challenges that we can face together, and the Canadian Chamber and chambers and boards of trade across the country have a critical role to play in working with governments at all levels, all political parties, and working together to try to ensure that the policies that we follow are ones that are good for this country. This is a country that faces big challenges, I say, but the thing that I know from the history of Canada is that every single time that we've been challenged, in war, in peace, good times, and bad, every time that we've been forced to confront a challenge, we've risen to that challenge and we've won. And we can do it again if we're prepared to show the vision, the courage, the entrepreneurship that you show every day in your businesses. We can pass on from this generation to the generation that follows us, a country that is even more successful, more prosperous, and with greater opportunity than the one we've been privileged to live in our lifetimes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Perrin. That was absolutely splendid.